20th. And the subject for tonight's meeting is the budget discussion. So why don't we start with a roll call?
Manager Lowe. Manager Anderson.
Here.
Manager Baki. I saw him signing on.
Manager Loth and Manager Baki have joined over the Zoom. I've made them the co-host, so they should be able to unmute. They might just need a minute.
Okay.
I'm here.
Was that Manager Lowe?
That's Chris.
It was, but then it looks like he lost connection and dropped off.
Manager Baki. Manager Taves.
Here.
President Schmaltz.
Here. Okay, thank you. Then moving on, then we'll turn it over to Emily. Mike, did you want to say any words before we get started?
No, I think you're in good hands here. Thank you, Emily.
Okay, I see Baki got on too now, so he should be on too.
Yes, I am here.
Good, thanks, Dave. Good. Okay, well, just a couple thoughts here. We have a lot to go through today, and I think I had gone through a lot of the questions. One of the things that came up from a lot of people was how are we going to fund the building and the land acquisitions? Because those are large dollars and they're not in the budget. So that's something we want to make sure we cover today. But other than that, I'm going to suggest we have Emily lead us through the memo that she had with all those updates that she's made already, and that'll get us into a lot of different discussions. But while we're doing that, I would ask each of the managers, if you have a particular issue that you're concerned about, make a note of it. So when we're done with this, going through these boxes, we can shift to the issues that are the highest priority for you. I know, Doug, you said some stuff in too.
Everything's been covered, so.
Yeah, okay, all right. So let's do it that way if we can. That way we'll cover all the stuff that's been done already, and then we can bring up any other issues that are still bothering you. With that, then I'll turn it over to Emily.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President, managers. Yeah, like Steve said, there's a lot to go through. Thank you all for giving comments at the first board workshop, which was on May 9th. This is now our second board workshop, and it's really the main purpose is getting through these comments, and I haven't prepared like a presentation like we did last time with presenting the budget, but just I recommend that we can go through the memo here and see if we want to stop at any point and have more discussion. And just note in the chat, Manager Lowe said he got kicked off, but in roll call, he's just confirming that he is here. Thanks, Manager Lowe. All right, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. So this first table in the memo was just the things that were mentioned at May 9th workshop. So we reformatted, moved the land acquisition and management to a new 6,000 series there. And then, oh, go ahead. I thought someone was trying to say something. So then number 2 is look into flood storage costs and try to estimate the cost per acre foot of storage created. You know, we've talked about this a couple times since, and it really will vary widely. It could be on the pricey end of things, it could be a big excavation project, kind of like what we've been doing. What we've seen is $1,000,000, $500,000, $1 million projects to do these big excavation storage kind of things. But there are cheaper alternatives too, and other non-structural ways to improve community preparedness. You know, working with partners, and, you know, if cities were to factor these kinds of things into their maintenance, or, you know, ordinances and rules play a big role in improving floodplain resiliency. So there is a really big range. And just for reference, Rice Creek Watershed District, adjacent to us, did a floodplain resiliency study. They did identify a lot of flood storage type of projects, and their cost range was about $140,000 to $630,000 for those capital projects. also discussed last time was just to, request to elaborate why the O&M program costs and staff time have dropped. In the 2024 budget, we had, just aligned everything with the workload analysis, and it had estimated a 0.6 FTE for O&M. We dropped it down to 1 FTE, and so that just means that, you know, the board sets that total staff wages and benefits budget, and then we allocate it out according to all the programs and projects. And so it doesn't mean paying that total any less, but just means shifting it elsewhere. And so we recommend that 1 FTE is more in line with actual time spent. You know, it's been adequate to meet inspection and maintenance needs. This might go up a little bit in the future, but for 2025, we recommended shifting more of the FTEs to non-point source pollution abatement. And that's, you know, the cost share programs that we're trying to allocate a lot to. And just note that these are general estimates to give an idea and just to demonstrate where, you know, the time goes. You know, that doesn't mean that we'll stop ourselves at 0.1 FTE. You know, we'll do the maintenance that is required, and we have a comprehensive O&M plan. You know, this is just general ballpark figures to try to illustrate where time goes, but it's not set in stone. There was a little bit of discussion about delinquent taxes. And this was a good point. You know, I think I was underestimating the revenues, the estimated 2024 year-end revenues from the levy. It's being kind of conservative there, but when you look at the last few years, and I'm going to just pull up that other attachment here, it really does vary by year. I'm sure for a variety of reasons. You know, 2015, it was super small, apparently. But the average since 2012 is about 0.5%. And so that revised budget packet that was posted in the board packet estimated 99.5% of that levy coming in. You've got your budgeted levy, and then the next column over is the estimated revenue. And it's just only a fraction of a percentage lower.
So I just, as a question then, as an action item, when we look at raising our levy for the following year, I think maybe we should build that in, an extra 0.5% to start with. So if we had a 0% increase, we'd still put in 0.5 or what the last 3 years have been in delinquencies. Might be better to use the last 3 or 4 years because it depends upon how the economy is going too. In tight times, people are not gonna be able to cover those taxes and so forth, so. But I'm suggesting we maybe look at that, Emily, as far as a way to build that into next year's number before we lose it, you know, and then we won't lose it because we'll have an extra 0.5% in there.
Worth
But
considering.
I don't know, I'm opening up to the board. What does the board think?
I think it's worth considering.
Well, I think if we're not coming down to a zero budget and that we are allowing for what we used to allow for, which is extra money to show in the actual calculations, and that we're not going to have that problem. I mean, that's a small amount, honestly, and so it's covered if you're doing your carryover properly. We haven't been doing that properly for the last 6 years. And so last year we were really under. And you saw that in our year-end report from the auditors. So we've got to build that back up again. I'm taking a completely different path here with what's being presented, and that is, if you go back to that chart you just had up, you know, historically, we did try to keep it really, really even as long as we could. But you see, we made some big jumps in 2017 and 2018. Emily only goes back here to 2012. So before 2012, things were like 755. You can see how long that period. We were only able to start doing this kind of budgeting after we became a metro watershed. And that was in 2008. And so that was really 2009. We kind of figured was our first real budgeting. But when we get to the point where we need to start putting money into projects, that's when we had to take that big jump. And then after that, you can see that they've been pretty modest, you know, increases. But we're at the point where we need to do another bump. And we're talking about, mine is about the same, it's about a 20+%, 28%. So we're about ready to go up to that next level, but we've got too many things that need to be, first of all, straightening out that carryover amount. So that we're not so tight when it comes to this period in the next year. Okay, because if you look at one of her reports here, I had asked for some of these top line things to be done, this dedicated funds breakout, for example. That shows you clearly, we have $1,025,576 in the bank as of 5/31. But of that amount, only 442,000 is general fund. Meaning that we can use it at our own discretion. Dedicated funds is the bulk of it, it's 583,000. So that's running pretty tight, and with our increases that we're looking at for wages. And then we brought that out as well, you know, we have to look at it, what we're looking at is a consolidated wage and benefit amount. We're not looking at just the wages separately. And so when we talk about the wages are actually, I think, what we need to be concerned about. It's been pretty flat with insurance. There was a time, some time ago, when insurance rates were going crazy at 10+% increases per year. But now we have to worry about keeping up with the wages that people are paying so that they can keep good people. And so, you know, I've got a 10% increase in wages, for example, and that's just for wages. It's not that total amount for the taxes. Taxes will go up according to wages, of course, but insurance which is the bigger one, does it. So when we're careful about those types of things, I think that we can get back to having a cushion that's sizable enough for the unexpected, which is what happened with us in the 61 projects 2 years ago. Because we had to tap into almost 900,000 of our reserve, or what we call reserves. But it's really the money that you need to get into the next 6 months of the next year. So I'm looking at this differently. We also have discussions about the business manager and a deputy administrator in a couple of years here. So I think we need to start doing that, starting with that business manager, whatever we're gonna end up calling it, operations manager person. And so that has to be included.
Well, the 2025 potential bump is a little bit more than a 10% bump
Mhm.
to the current year.
Yeah, but it doesn't include that extra.
Well, let's get through all the changes
Yeah.
and come back and look at the total budget
Yeah.
and see how we're gonna be short or over, whatever it's gonna be, and then we'll have to decide. What kind of levy we have to do. We usually do that towards the end.
Okay.
So. But I think Manager Anderson's points are well taken, so. Okay, Emily, you wanna continue?
Sure. So this other one, provide a separate breakout for projects that are dependent on unconfirmed or pending grant funding. This shows up further down in the comments as well, and that is attached. And it's reflective of that tab that was already in the budget packet of earned grant revenue. And even since this has been posted, you know, this is a pretty you know, things are already out of date. We're applying for grants and you know, getting the decisions on them in real time. And so even this can be updated since it was posted, but it gives you a general idea of all the different things that we have in the works.
Any questions on that sheet?
Pardon?
I was just wondering if there's any questions on that sheet.
Yep, she's got one more box, I think, to talk.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and just the last one of merely the comments that were discussed at the May 9th meeting. This one that I had recorded was provide the chart from last year's budget packet showing the historical record of tax impacts for each county year by year, and so that is attached as well. And you can see that year to year. That's these last two columns here, and I can zoom in just a little bit, but yeah, so those are the comments. You know, there were several more submitted in writing since the May 9th meeting, which I can go through, or if we want to discuss just those that first table first, we can do whatever the board wishes to do.
I have one comment on the table with the graphs. It's draft budget, 2025 budget, page 2. 5/13 is the date. You've got the breakout of Chisago County on the two, the green and blue chart and the kind of orange and gray chart. But on the red one on the top, which is the estimated market value, you don't show that breakout, and I would like to see that continue in all of those charts. It's very important as we get into the Comfort Lake management districts, you know, the intense work of those two of our 4. It's important to always show what that estimated market value, the net tax capacity, and the levy impact is to both counties. So if you could just add that on that top chart, that would be good. You've got them in chart 2 and chart 3.
Sure, they don't provide that breakout to us, but I can just manually calculate it with the total EMV, and I'll multiply it by that year's percentage of the NTC. I'm sure they're similar.
What do you mean they don't provide it? Don't you get one from Chisago and one from Washington on tax capacity or market value?
No, we get the market value from the state, I believe from Bowser. And then they also, or no, I think the Department of Revenue provides the estimated market value, and then Bowser provides our levy apportionment, and that's the net capacity.
Yeah, but they have to have it broken down by each county. So, call the source, whoever the original source is for that. You should be able to get it.
How are you gonna use that? Is that gonna adjust? I mean, you may wanna,
It's good information when you're talking to the public, especially, it comes up all the time. Commissioner Neron likes to always bring up how much of the money is coming from Washington County. And that is a valid point. There is more money coming from the Washington County, but for the Comfort Lake and Little Comfort Lake, most of the drainage is originating in Washington County.
Mhm.
That creates the problem.
Yeah.
And so if we don't always keep that in mind, and all you have to do is take a look at the map, especially of the big Comfort area. 90% of it, honestly, or 80 at least, is in the city of Forest Lake. And so the name of our watershed was not the Lake of Forest, but it was the city of Forest Lake. Because that's where the water, the stormwater was coming from, not the lake itself. And I think it's fine that we interpret it that way as the lakes, because that connects everything, but it sometimes diminishes where the real problem is, where the problem lies, and where we have to focus our efforts in making sure that we are going to have sustainable goals going forward. It's not gonna happen if we don't have that area in the Forest Lake City, cleaned up and provided, just like we did in our others. We spent a lot of time cleaning up the legacy loads so that we knew that we had a clean slate, so to speak, as clean as you can get in the ecosystems, going into the water before we actually focused on the lakes themselves. So we've got a big haul in our area,
Okay, thank you.
okay?
Emily, go ahead.
Tori, put the air conditioner on, that's really important.
Muted. Sorry. I'll just note as well, so in the budget packet that's posted, we had updated the Clean Water Partnership loan projections, and I believe Manager Keith had a comment about that as well. And so, what we can do and what we would recommend, you know, the board has some options that I'd like to discuss. Is we can close out loan C at this time and proceed with applying for a separate loan D right now. That option results in lower interest now that there's an interest rate in this Clean Water Partnership loan program. It's all dependent on how much principal you take out and how long you have the disbursement period open for. And so the longer we keep the loan C disbursement period open, the more interest will rack up. And so I worked with the PCA staff and did some estimates. And if we just go ahead and close out that loan C, which is at $750,000 right now, that will minimize the amount of interest being paid on that. We'll begin the repayments could be as early as December or as late as next June, I believe. And then apply for a new loan, which we could call loan D, in that amount of $500,000, which has been in our projections. And let me just pull that up so we can see what I'm talking about. The scenario shown here would be closing out loan C that's done at $750,000, and then open up loan D. Could maybe disperse some this year, but probably the bulk will be in 2025. And then start the estimated interest amounts on those.
Okay, so can we just agree on that? Or we don't have to take a vote on it, or?
To close out the current loan?
Yeah.
Well, I've never understood why we hold on to that money like that. I never have understood it. So yes, I'm in favor of that.
So as the rest of the board agrees, then just go ahead. Is everybody okay with that? So then Emily, why don't you just go ahead and move ahead on what you had suggested doing? Mike, do you have any comments on that, if you're still with us?
Only that maybe you want to have a motion, so it's
I'll make
documented
the-
as such.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to close out MPCA loan C in approximate amount of 150,000. Isn't that what you said, Emily?
750,000, yes.
Oh, 750 is what's still open?
It's been dispersed, and if we close it out now, then it'll begin the repayment at 750,000.
Okay,
Plus.
so we're just closing out that loan. We don't have money that we haven't taken, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a second, so Roy, could you please do the roll call vote for us?
Manager Lowe,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Baki,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
President Schmaltz.
Aye, so the motion carries. Okay,
Okay, we'll proceed with the scenario. Thank you.
mm-hmm.
And then other note that I had here, so we had presented the budget to the Citizen Advisory Committee on May 14th. And now they've since had their second meeting just this past Tuesday and followed up as well. As President Schmaltz noted, there was some concern from at least one member about big expenses coming up in the future, those loan repayments plus the office space. The floodplain vulnerability implementation has been mentioned as well. And so I can address that here a little bit, if now's a good time.
Yeah, why don't we take, to make sure everybody's on the same page or how we're gonna handle this, and then we can get it back to the CAC also, so they're aware of it. Why don't you go ahead, Emily?
Sure. So we don't have, we have the expenses of the loan repayments that's factored into the budget, and under these current scenarios, we're able to kind of live with those payments, with these projections that I have prepared. As noted, there are some big expenses that just aren't in the budget right now, because we don't know what that expense will be. The office space is a big one. It could be a really big range of, land acquisition plus construction costs, or maybe it could be acquisition of a building and then renovation. There's a lot of different options. Options for revenues for that. Some watershed districts had saved up their levy over time, or, you take a break from doing projects and then you can use a big chunk of your levy there. Other options are, there's at least one grant program available through the USDA. We qualify for a small community in rural, in fact, community facilities. So this would be a community facility for these populations of a population less than 20,000. So that's a grant, and they also have a loan program through that same USDA program that's available. Other options include bonding, or other kind of loans, like a bank loan to do that with. So how the board and, when the board
Emily?
kind of, yes,
May I add a couple more options that we
Yeah.
visited 2 watershed districts where the city also donated land,
good
and
point.
the other was a private owner donated land. So those are other options as well.
Yeah, that's
Thank you,
good
Manager
to know.
Bucky.
Thank you. So there's a lot of options out there, and I think, the district's been trying for a while to really get on a good course. And, one of the things that Access Philanthropy had said in their presentation a few months ago was it really takes a lot of time and effort to run a capital campaign. It would be nice if there was someone who just wanted to donate the land. I think that's good to be putting feelers out there and open to that. But in case that doesn't happen for us, it really takes, some dedicated staff time and dedicated time from the board as well to, plan and implement a capital campaign of this scope. And so I think that could be factored into, the administrator succession planning and new hiring that the board is planning to do, of really dedicating the amount of time and resources needed to run that campaign, and then figure out what the path will be and then seek those revenues.
So one thing I think we're kind of overlooking a little bit is that we're not a private institution here where we have to raise capital. We have the right to tax the public. So basically, I think what we would probably do is, well, first of all, we try to get as much free as we possibly can, as was suggested, through grants and donations, et cetera, et cetera. But I think what we'll eventually probably do is end up bonding it, running a bond, and then instead of paying it off in 10 years like we have to do with our current loan, we could spend it over, what, 25 to 30?
Yeah, 30, typically it's 30 years.
30-year loans.
If you get a mortgage, where we
Yeah.
can get a traditional loan from a bank up to $2 million. And we're restricted at that point by statute, and I don't think our project's gonna be over that amount. But yeah,
Well-
so we've got different ways to do it. So if we go that loan route, obviously you'll pay a little bit more than with some of the grants are 0, and then the MPCA loan is, 1%, 1.5%. So it's practically nothing. But I don't think the MPCA can be used for buildings like this. I don't know if you've asked them, Emily, but I don't believe that you can. It's worth looking into, though.
But
Yeah,
think
I
it's
asked.
Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
No, I asked, this had come up, and if we wanted to do some kind of green features, like a lot of new office spaces, they have like plantings or a stormwater treatment kind of demonstration site. If it has that water quality benefit, it's eligible, but you know, the building itself would not be.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think we can plan, we're not at the stage where we need to be planning that in our budget though at this point.
And we also keep in mind, we're offsetting the rent we're paying, what we're going to mortgage. It's not like we're having to come up with a mortgage and still pay this rent.
That's true. All of that.
That
Yeah.
offset, once
Absolutely.
you get that, all of
Yeah.
a sudden it looks a little better.
So when you bond it and offset the interest, I mean, the mortgage we're paying, basically, the rent we're paying. We can spread it over 30 years and it shouldn't have too big of an impact on our.
But
on our
I
budget.
wouldn't expect it to.
Yeah, yeah.
The only thing we would be saving is the rent, the tax component of the rent. Because government buildings are not taxed. So right now, we're paying a tax, the property tax on the building as part of our mortgage. Or, excuse me, our rent, I mean.
So any other questions on that? So I don't think that'll be a big issue as brought up by the CAC, so I think we have a way out on this. What about land acquisition? Emily, do you have any thoughts on that? Because that's a big dollar amount too, right? But I think we got some control over that too, in terms of trying to stick $2 million in the budget when we don't know whether we need it or not, so go ahead.
Yes, I would recommend that if there is a priority land acquisition that we really want to go for, we apply for grant funds. There is, it takes about 1.5 years lead time, but the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Fund, if it's greater than 500,000, is a great grant source for that sort of thing. If there are demonstrable habitat benefits. There's also the Conservation Partners Legacy, which kind of is sourced from the Lessard Sam's, but it's more expedited than going straight to Lessard Sam's. It's for things less than 500,000. Those are 2 good grant programs that we could go to for land acquisition. And I believe there is a 10% match required for Conservation Partners Legacy. There's no minimum match for Lessard Sam's, but leveraged funds make a grant more competitive. And so we'd have to think about that, how much we could dedicate, and using that staff time as in kind is a good way to do that, albeit kind of a smaller proportion. So there's grant options for land acquisitions.
Any comments or questions on that?
Oh, well, the only thing about Lessard Sam's, and I've talked to Mike about this on a couple of occasions in the past, but, it's better for us to have a really good long-term plan, 3-5 years out on what it is that we want to accomplish, and the whole project, for example, I'm just using, numbers off my head here, but let's say it's 15 million over 4 years, and we have identified areas that we want to set aside as natural areas. But we're not going to do it all at one time. We can only do so much, every year, but at least we're getting the authorization for that 15 million. And then maybe we draw 5 million every year for whatever acquisitions or whatever workload we can handle. And then it just, goes out in time, but it's all laid out and it's staged. And I think the first thing from my perspective is that we need to get that plan from our engineers, working with proper staff people, and the board on the priorities. How do we go about this? We're kind of starting that with the reports that we're working on for the work that we're doing for the flood plain and the set aside for greenways and all of that. But if we could consolidate all of that into a comprehensive report, then we could go to Lessard Sam, we can get that big amount. And then we know for that next period, we're not doing this annually. We've got that whole project report covered. And then we start doing and drawing annually as we can. But that's how I would like to see us approach that. So we're not wasting time every annual period of budgeting to budget individual projects. We're doing it all together as a comprehensive plan.
In many respects, we talked about doing a strategic plan too, and we want to get a grant for that. Maybe that could be worked into that whole effort and use that effort to pull that together.
Mhm.
So I think that'd be one way to get it done without a lot of pain. So,
Yeah, and I think with all of the specialty reports that we've been asking EOR to do, it sounds like they're all sort of coming together so that they'll be ready, you know, here within this, hopefully this summer, by the end of the summer, where they can start working on that type of a comprehensive plan. And I think we're almost there. So
any comments or thoughts?
I would see us hopefully taking that type of a plan in 2025, budgeting for 2026.
Right.
Yeah, and then Lassard Sam could start, that effort could start in 2025, so we have a good idea of whether we're in the running.
Emily, could you provide some feedback back to the CAC on both of those topics in terms of how we see we're gonna approach that? Is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it would be good because they did spend some time thinking about this, and I think we owe them some responses or some feedback. And wherever we can as we go along here, so that would be good if we could get that resolved. And we have work there on what we want to do, so they should be up to speed with us,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit on Tuesday as well, of kind of the importance of grants, and I can show on this next item kind of the NRI work and floodplain work. We touched on that, but I'll make sure to bring that home.
Okay, good.
Also on Tuesday, the CAC had discussed they had provided one more comment that was just this past Tuesday, so it's not in the memo here, but when thinking, they had talked about levy increases and how the district may want to increase its levy to offset these big costs that we have and provide more security. And I showed the history of the kind of a flat levy for a while and then a big bump and then kind of incremental. They had recommended, most of them were in agreement that they preferred to see small incremental increases a little bit each year. And they recommended doing that as opposed to a big jump, which gets more attention. So that was just another comment that they had.
Yeah, it does, but you know, sometimes people sit back and look at how that actually works out. And if it's explained properly, it works. The other thing is that you gotta show results. You've got to show what you're doing and if the projects have made a difference in their particular lives and properties. So it's been a good, I appreciate what the CAC is saying. But this has been a good philosophy for the district, and I think it will continue to be. And I think we're at that point where we need to look at doing that more dramatic bump than we typically do.
Again, I think this is gonna come to issue when we get through all the questions and
Yeah.
that, look at where we are, and then we gotta work on that levy, which has always been a challenge, so, okay. Emily, want to proceed then? Thank you.
Okay. And so kind of on that topic of, you know, the floodplain, the natural resources inventory, I thought I would just link, so last July, we had talked about these things and kind of, you know, what are the priorities and kind of what are some things that we're going to be looking at with all of this. And so President Schmaltz provided some comments here. And then we sort of elaborated on that with, you know, this proposed strategy for going about, you know, Greenway, if you want to call it, or just this next phase. The district has had, you know, phosphorus reductions as sort of our North Star, and these diagnostic studies were really good at finding the pathway to that, and they've been our compass. And so we've been trying to figure out what is kind of that new North Star. And it's hard because there are multiple benefits. If we wanted to just go out and restore the top 10 wetlands in the district, we have that information, we could just go do that. if we wanted to restore the best, protect the best places for habitat or for groundwater recharge, we have that information. And in fact, we've started to overlay that as well, and that's how we got those priority areas. It's a map in our watershed management plan that we updated a couple of years ago. And so how do we do the most amount of good with these projects? And we'd recommended the two-prong approach of starting with Berland area. He's kind of giving time for these programs to really get up to speed with education and outreach and the cost share. And then higher up in the watershed, prioritize the sites for flood retention and resiliency, because that seems to be the next really kind of big risk factor. But then looking at those multiple benefits, and we could maybe add floodplain storage, but also restore a wetland and achieve habitat benefits. And by achieving those habitat benefits, then you're eligible to this whole world of grant funds. And so we had recommended kind of that approach with it. And we had shared some of the, I'm going to just scroll right down to some of the maps that have been prepared. So a lot of that natural resources inventory, we had looked in a deeper dive on that Bone Lake South wetland, which we are still in the process of trying to acquire and find resolution with the landowner. We're still not quite there yet. Groundwater dependent natural resources inventory. And so we have a technical memo from EOR and we've got maps. So that'll be one of the things we overlay and one of the multiple benefits that we could use to target projects. And then the groundwater dependent lakes there, we have that map as well. And then the streams, groundwater dependent streams. And then a recharge potential map. So if we want to prioritize areas that recharge groundwater, we have that information as well. And then here I kind of alluded to this earlier of the top 10 wetland protection sites and then the top 15 wetland restoration. So, you know, good quality wetlands that we want to protect. And then the top 15 that are maybe damaged and in need of restoration. And so we have a lot of really good data that all of our efforts to date have provided us. And so what we propose doing is overlay that with this floodplain work that is going on. And even as we're finding, the floodplain work it's complicated, and you can really tweak the priorities just within the realm of flood risk only and get really different maps. And so that's just one data point to compare to all these other ones. And then we can identify the very best, kind of the very best top 20% of projects to achieve what we'd recommend first, that flood resiliency, but then also wetlands, habitat, groundwater, all of those things. And I'm really hoping that'll come into focus once we get this flood resiliency piece completed.
Well, I think those three charts are probably good charts. I had put that together last July because we had spent about 4 or 5 months working on Greenway from a number of different angles, and we came out and we weren't really clear what we wanted to do. So kind of put that summary together, and I think looked like it's going to work out for us. So it can be very complicated because we're looking at so many things. But as Emily pointed out, if we just kind of extend our focus on water through floodplain and then piece in the other stuff as it provides an opportunity, then we can become pretty efficient in getting a lot of things done at the same time. So.
Yeah, I've never been unclear about this. And so I think by bundling this message a different way, and I have some wordsmithing I'd like to talk to Emily about, speaking on that same topic. The 2025 project planning one, there's not I think there has become this dichotomy between what we've been doing and now what we're moving into, and it's never been a separate thing. It's an evolution from the immediate need to clean up our water bodies because they were all not in good shape. And so we did what we needed to do that, and now we're moving on to the sustainability part of what we've always been about. In the speed charts, that speedometer type chart that we have, I noticed that you didn't have those all in this new packet under 2025 project planning. But it shows the goal for the state standards, but the one showing the district standard is not on this. And that's a critical keystone to keep always in whenever we're talking about this progression into this next stage, because once we've cleaned up the water, now we're talking about those things on the landscape that aren't as visible, but are critically important for sustainability into the future. And that's where the big umbrella of climate resiliency comes in. And so all of these things that we're doing right now fall under that climate resiliency. We know that precipitation is increasing at a rate that's not sustainable with past methods of handling that. And so what we're doing is moving into that period where we're looking at the natural areas that can be and should be preserved and protected. We're looking at areas that have impact in groundwater, so that when our cities keep expanding, they're not going into areas that are critical for the clean water that's needed for the public, that the new increase in population that are going to need access to it. So this is a natural evolution of the plan that we've always had at Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District. And I want to have us start talking in those terms so that we don't seem like, what are we gonna do now? We've done this, and now what are we gonna do? We know what we're going to do. We've always known. And as has been talked about here tonight, all of these big plans that we've been, and projects that we've been, studies that we've been asking EOR to do, are the foundation for this next phase. So we need to have EOR put that together, not in all these little separate reports, but into a master plan for sustainability. I think we're saying the right things. I just think it needs to be framed in that way, is that we are naturally moving into the next phase of sustainability.
President Schmaltz,
Yeah, go ahead, Manager Baki.
I'd like to piggyback on what Manager Anderson is discussing as far as our direction as a watershed district. I am up here at my cabin just outside of Cook, Minnesota, where they received 5 to 7 inches of rain. And the city of Cook itself is under 4 to 5 feet of water, and it's not going to peak until Saturday. The people here have been gut punched. They don't have flood insurance. They're trying to, deal with the rising water, and they don't know what they're going to do afterwards as far as fixing and replacing their homes, their businesses. So as we work as a watershed district on flood mitigation, that's a priority from my point of view after just driving up here and trying to find a way to get to my cabin, because the water is just, it's everywhere. And it doesn't become a real issue until people have to deal with it. And I guess if we can keep ahead of that and keep that in front of us, I think that's our talking point for our public, and to really give us a priority and a vision of what we need to do.
Good point, Dave. I think that's excellent. Everybody's gonna remember this year for sure. So it's something we can leverage in the future.
Yeah, well,
Well, even down here, we're on the verge of breaking an all-time record precipitation
Yeah.
for Minnesota in June.
mhm,
And in my place, we're at 7.74 inches of rain in June alone.
wow,
That's astonishing.
yeah, it is.
And we got 10 days to go.
Mhm.
Okay, good. Any other comments? Listen, if not, let's move on then, Emily.
Okay. So let me reset a little bit here. Let's go back to the memo. All right, so shall we get into the written comments that were submitted? So starting with Manager Schmaltz. Wants to discuss how to represent shoreline restorations. I don't know, Steve, do you want to kind of take one and elaborate?
Yeah, if you could pull up the chart, your Forest Lake chart that you had sent out on, that Manager Anderson was referencing, project planning, 2025 project planning.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, go to the Forest Lake one. And, in that pie chart, you'll notice that for the rest of the, reductions we needed, we actually were calling it, shoreline restoration at one time, but now we've got shoreline buffers there. I think we might want to consider other projects. When we had, shoreline restoration, and that was used at our Forest Lake Association, people felt that shoreline restoration was only valuable to us because it provided the last 100 pounds. And they said, well, we really don't need that. We've got another alum treatment coming, which is gonna pick up more than that. That's our rationale. So I think we kind of took a step backwards in terms of how people perceive shoreline restoration. Instead of positioning it as a protection strategy for what we've already accomplished, that's what we want to get across. So I just want to make sure that we don't fall in that trap again for other lakes, and that we actually make sure that as other projects or however we want to do it. Just so we don't hamper ourselves on the shoreline restoration. Shoreline restoration is protection as much as anything else.
It's sustainability, and
Yeah.
that's
Good
what
word.
I was talking about before, is that we're moving into the sustainability phase of our out of our district focus.
So that's the point I wanted to make there, and as we go forward, we should try to make sure we try to keep it a little bit more general, I think, in terms of what our options are for that last 100 or 200 pounds or whatever it might be. So, okay, thanks, Emily.
Okay, and so, yeah, when the new budget, is getting posted, and elaborated on those changes in the memo, but, when we do this next iteration, I'll have just a separate table, and it could be kind of the changes log, and it'll show just a
Okay.
more succinct list of those changes. Okay, there was a question about, the general admin salary and benefits. Yeah, so kind of similar to the O&M. It doesn't, reducing that one item, doesn't mean that those were actual hours or, that the total budget had fallen. We had just recommended that, 1.7 FTE is more consistent with actual staff admin time, rather than just using what the workload analysis said, which was 2.6 FTEs. And so it's really just a reallocation, out of the administration category and into programs and projects. So just been trying to balance what the workload analysis said is the future demand, but then kind of tempering it with actual, timesheet data. Just to, again, when we're approving the budget, it kind of illustrates where that time goes. But, we don't, it doesn't mean we're capped at that much or anything like that. We just, it's for demonstration purposes. We talked about the delinquencies, which I think this one got at. So maybe I'll just keep moving on. Stream monitoring. Yeah, so we had increased this budget as much as we could with keeping it balanced with the scenario of a flat levy. But recall that we had proposed doing the diagnostic monitoring. We had done diagnostic studies for all the lakes just over the years, but then keeping up with that diagnostic monitoring on a regular basis and doing it on a rotating basis moving forward. So we have a schedule for that, and had proposed doing some diagnostic monitoring in 2025. I'll keep us moving here. So again, kind of a similar question of looking at the staffing for the non-point source pollution abatement. I just kind of explained that here of kind of where that estimation of the amount of FTEs needed for all those 4,100 line items. And those are totally separate and driven by the total staff wages and benefits item on the budget overview. But then everything else, like 3004D, that's kind of a separate thing from the staff wages and benefits, and that's actual expenses. And so some of these will be grant dependent. And in fact, happy to say that we just, we had applied to a new grant program last year, and we were awarded $60,000 this year to support our shoreline program. So that'll be for shoreline buffer restorations as well as outreach. And so we can update the budget to show those revenues for 2025 as well.
Emily, I think the point here was that I had trouble finding out where the shoreline restoration dollars were. Because as you pointed out here, they're in several different areas, so it might be helpful. You've done a very good job in the past of our little notes on the side of the budgets. The side, describing what those line items are. And since shoreline restoration is so big, maybe we can make those comments a little bit more specific. Even in permitting, you might say partially for shoreline restoration or something like that, just so it reminds us that those dollars are there as we go through this whole thing.
Okay.
Because that's a big program and it's spread across for a number of areas, so it's good to, as we go down the notes, it just reminds us that what that's for, or where it's located. So thank you.
Okay. So you had also commented that some of these, the watershed planning and resiliency and floodplain seem underfunded. And so there's another one where grants will be really important to add that in. And we're proposing, once we get those projects identified, applying for the grants, and then if and when they're awarded, adding those dollars into the budget. But of course, if the board wants to increase the levy to make more local dollars available, or reduce another budget line item, or alternatively dip into the reserve, it can increase those numbers, but it's just going to be a balance of existing revenues. And then similarly, we had kind of lower estimated engineering costs for 2025, but those are often tied to our grants as well. A lot of the grant dollars go to the actual construction, so like the contractor pay applications, but we're able to do a lot with EOR because of grants, and so those would increase with grants as well.
Yeah, and in fact, we're transitioning from the lake projects to the flood projects, but we haven't got into the flood projects yet in terms of capital spending. So we have a little bit of a gap there, and it's showing up in our engineering costs.
Yeah, well, it's not just flood. It's not just flood.
Well, no,
planning.
but you know what I mean.
It's that encompasses all those things we talked about earlier. But I agree. I think that we've got to show that preliminary work that's needed to do what we just talked about, which is consolidate all these independent reports into a sustainability plan that includes floods, that includes protection of natural areas. It includes identifying upland areas and priority areas for drinking water, all of those things that we've talked about. So I think we don't want to skimp on that engineering area when we're going to be planning all of these major, it might not be a shovel in the ground project, but it's going to be a sustainability project. So we don't want to get into 2025 and not have the allocation needed for EOR to follow up on all of that and to produce what we need to move forward. Is Mike still on the phone?
I think he's having
Yes.
connect, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good top level discussion to have with EOR so that we can get an estimate of what that more comprehensive look at all of these separate things, and pulling them together into a true program for the future and a direction for us going forward for the next number of years. And if you could talk to them and we could get some information in July, we could still adjust our budget.
Yes, well, I think it's also, this difference in part is also from having, some really, good staff that have joined, both with Mike Sandiger and Victoria and the permitting, the amount of engineering, needed really is probably more just from the standpoint of at the appropriate level where EOR comes in, but a lot of the preliminary stuff is done by staff. Of course, Blaine is very comfortable with, increasingly more comfortable with managing a lot of things on the project side as well. So, so I think it's just a combination of the things that you discussed, in addition to
Yeah.
that. So,
Well, that makes sense, but we still need our engineers for the civil engineering that's needed for the sustainability projects that we're moving into.
correct. But I'm just thinking historically, even if you figured in adjusted for inflation, we're not far off from where the district was in the planning side of things 8, 9, 10 years ago. So we're still in the range, but yes, I agree that yes, we're moving into that phase, and this is where EOR. I think we're well positioned. It was just a matter of having these meetings with the board, and I think we're on our way.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, any other questions? None? Emily, you want to continue?
All right. So comment number 9 from Manager Schmaltz, do we need to budget more dollars for community/city grants to address the once in a lifetime City of Forest Lake projects? I'll, rather than reading it, I'll let you all.
Yeah, my concern here was that we know there's several big projects coming up in the next 2 years, and while may not be next year, we need to stay on top of that, and I just think we need to have some money in case something comes up suddenly. We're always being surprised by Forest Lake, City of Forest Lake on things, so maybe we can transfer money over, and that's fine. It looks like you're monitoring it here from what you've written up, which is fine, and we want to maintain that relationship, but these are once in a lifetime projects. You're not gonna recoat highway, North Shore Trail all the way to 97, every 3 years, right? It's once in a 50 years. So if we miss it, we miss it, and they're only gonna move the boat launch out of downtown once. So when you do, 1,200 feet of shoreline at one time, you wanna make sure we don't miss that, so. And it looks like you've got people working on this, so that's fine, and I just wanted to make sure we don't overlook that, so, thank you.
And then it also talked about looking at I think related to your comment earlier of it's not just shoreline, but what other projects to achieve that remaining 100 pounds for Forest Lake. And so we recommended, it's not just shorelines, but it's really a combination of a lot of things that we have going on right now that are going to result in those benefits.
Again, just to point out here, somehow we've seemed to have lost track of all those desktop studies we did 5 or 6 years ago on North Shore Trail and South Shore Trail for projects that can do 15 or 20 pounds or 5 pounds. And yes, the cost is above $1,000 or even above 1,500, but there's some projects there that probably would be pretty efficient to do. And I'm just thinking maybe we should take a second look at those and maybe pull out the best ones. If our shoreline restoration program isn't going to spend all its money, we might take some of that money, shift it over, do a quick project at the end of the year or something like that. and use that money to get some benefit for the lake, rather than having it starting over next year. So, yeah, I don't know if you've looked at those recently, Emily. You might want to take a look at them and see.
Are you talking about all of those dead end areas that,
No, not on the street. These are other projects like, what's the first project we did over there? Can't think. These are all desktop studies that are being done within 100 feet of the lake. And it requires working with a property owner, but it's stuff that's coming in that's not being treated.
Okay.
And it's, you know, it can be as much as $10,000 a pound, which you're not gonna do it, but
oh, that study, yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of them. There's over 200 of
But
them.
there's, isn't it 100 of those little dead end areas that used to, I think they used to be launches. I'm not sure what they used to be.
No,
but
It's
there was
easements the
access.
city owns.
Okay, yeah.
And we're working on that right now.
Okay.
She wrote that up here,
Okay.
so we're okay on that.
So we're doing that program.
Well, we need to accelerate, I think, but that's a different discussion. It sounds here like the city isn't ready to do it, is what Emily's saying here. So I think we need to go take a look at that. I got a note to
Yeah.
follow up on that.
It's kind of in the shoreline area.
Yeah, it is.
Mhm.
You
Well-
can actually use those as demo areas. for the
Yeah,
public.
and there's $80,000 in the non-point source fund that never gets used by the cities. So,
Well, that's not this year, so it was taken out a couple of years ago.
no, it's in there. I just saw it.
Well, we'll get that back later. Was that Mike?
SWA studies. Yes. Yeah, those SWA studies were done 8 to 10 years ago by the Washington Conservation District. And
Right.
so we had looked and we had hired a firm to work with the city to look at 6th Street there on the south side of First Lake. And that project alone was pushing $200,000, and I think was giving us 9 pounds. So we put it on hold at the time, and that
Right,
was
no,
one that we thought was maybe the better. So a lot of these require more engineering. It's not something we could just do it, you know, at the end of the year, so to speak. You know, so there are some challenges from that standpoint.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just don't wanna miss any opportunities that are, relatively speaking, a little bit lower hanging fruit than a $200,000 program, but yes, okay, just so we take a look at it, don't forget about them. I can't believe the 8 years have gone by. Not getting any
Yep.
younger, are we?
yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
well,
Yeah,
right,
that's
and
good
just
news.
so you know,
No,
right,
yeah.
Greg and I do refer back to him on a fairly regular basis.
I can remember.
Still trapped.
That was the only first few crumbs they threw at us before it's like, that's why I remember.
Oh, okay,
So we got into the bigger stuff.
okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Emily. Let's move on.
Okay, Manager Anderson, indicated that she didn't get time to get through, all of the comments she'd like to make, but she provided these 3. And so we had kind of briefly brought it up, the dedicated fund accounts earlier, that I had shown. Jackie, do you want to show those again or speak further on those?
Well, it's a listing, if you're asking me, it's a listing of all of our dedicated funds so that all the board members have knowledge of what it is that
Right.
we specifically set money aside for, and which can only be used for that purpose unless, you know, we have some shortfall and the board decides to transfer those monies, but typically you don't want to do that. But this is a list of all of the dedicated grants that are, excuse me, dedicated funds that we've set aside. So it's a bookkeeping thing. It's not, doesn't mean separate accounts at the bank. It's just a bookkeeping way of saying this is how we're gonna spend our money. I did have a question on those bottom, the bottom 2, yeah, is that just a subset of the other restricted dedicated funds line?
They're just not shown here. So this 1 million was just what's in the main savings account at First Resource Bank. I guess I could have provided the dollar amount, but these ones we actually do have physically separate bank accounts for. And so I didn't subtract them from this because they're not included to begin with.
Okay, so where it says other restricted dedicated funds held in separate bank accounts, not factored into the total here.
Yep.
When you say into separate bank accounts, you mean those two things, right? The escrow?
Yep.
Okay,
In the checking.
Oh,
and then the funds dedicated to uncashed checks held in FRB checking account?
Yeah.
That's not a separate fund.
Well, they're dedicated in the sense of every month when we do the transfer, we transfer enough to pay the bills for that month. And so that's, you know, dedicated to those bills that are going to be paid, those checks. that
Yeah,
are
but
out.
that's a bookkeeping thing. That's not a separate fund. You know, like we have at the beginning. They're not distinct funds. That's just a bookkeeping
Yeah,
practice. Yeah, okay.
And then we talked about the overhead expenses a little bit, and yeah, depending on for the outcome of this new staff hiring and the scenarios that the board is considering, I'm sure you know considering very closely what the salary and budget and everything will be, and so that just might change what total staff budget for 2025 might look like. So provided just a range to consider. Was there any comments or questions on that one, or did you want me to pull that up?
Well, if we want to talk about it, now's the time to talk about adding those positions. So it's up to you, President Schmalz. What do you want to do?
Adding a
Talk about it now?
adding about the new positions that
Yeah.
we've talked about?
Yeah.
Well, I think we were planning to do that, weren't we?
Well, I think so, but it wasn't included in this prepared budget. So we've got to add to that area. And did you build in a 10% increase? And that handles, you know, not, everybody's not gonna get a 10%, but it'll be factored in to the budget, and so we don't have to concern ourselves with that, or the increases that happen just, you know, with your reviews and all that kind of stuff. So it should handle all of that.
the column that's 2025 potential is that 10% bump over the 2025 draft budget.
Yeah, well, yeah, but what, I crossed that out, I can't read it now. 1295465. Is that what you have?
10.
10, yeah. When I did mine, it's 1,226,000. What I have.
Well, I think this
And
is certainly gonna be done next year, so I think we should probably at least put one position in, for
Mhm.
sure.
Well, I think we should do the 1,226,000. Because if we're going to do, a increase in wages, we're going to do for the consumer price CPI basis, and then we're going to allow for their normal raises that happen from year to year, right, on the schedule. And then we want to look at this office operations manager position with benefits and so forth. And then toward the end of the year, I thought the plan was then to look at the deputy administrator. Because the office operations manager isn't one to move into that position. That position will stay. And then the deputy administrator, at least we've got a few months in for 2025. If we can hire by that time, if not, then that will carry over into the beginning of 2026. And we'll already have the money there to do that. We don't have to wait for the levy to come in mid-year.
Again, I think, you know, that hasn't been worked out in terms of what the structure is gonna be even, so I think putting one position and a 10% increase would be a good start, yeah.
Okay.
Unless the board has any other thoughts.
That's the 1,226 then.
Yeah. Dave, are you scheduled to meet with Mike? I'm trying to think if we have any, we were gonna try to pick some dates. I think we did that, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yes.
Manager Button?
Yes, we did. We have some dates set. There's one at the end of June coming up, I believe.
Right, okay. And that's probably.
And I'm
should be
not
one of the
sure.
discussions.
Yeah, I'm not sure which manager is assigned to that one. Does anybody know?
No, we have to look that up and find out. I think I might be part of that one for June. I'm not sure.
Dave and I did the
First
One that-
one, yeah.
one that, yeah, February, I think it was, the one that's.
And
existing
Dave has
now.
kind of been the continuity through the whole thing, and then
Oh, he's the leader.
the rest of us would
Sure.
fill in with him then, or else have two in Dave,
Yeah, he
depending
and
on the
he and I
situation.
worked on the SMART goals.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, well, we'll figure it out. We don't
Yeah,
have to do
but
that
we
now.
want to make sure we get that on the calendar, and don't miss
Yeah.
it, so to talk to Mike about this.
Just check that.
This would be one topic we'd want to see how that's progressing, so.
Mhm.
Okay, so we're gonna add 10% for the salary and then also another position. That's what number did you come up with, Manager Anderson?
The total would be 1,226, 1,226.
Try that, Emily, and then include the old number in the notes, so we know what we moved up from. If you could do that, Emily.
Okay, and would you like to see, so that will be more than the revenues that we currently have, in the
Right.
budget? And so you'd just like to show that deficit and we'll kind of work from there, or do you want me to try to balance that by?
No, I think balancing has got to be done when we're done adding stuff in that, and then we have to have a discussion on what we're gonna do to get even, or,
Yeah, I have that worked out on my scenario too.
or sell ice cream cones at Arts in the Park,
Mm.
raise some extra money. Okay, so we'll cover that ground when we get to it, Emily.
Sounds good.
Be a tougher part of the meeting, I suspect.
I'll
Then we
I'll
got
wait to hold the
CAC
note.
comment.
Pardon?
Yeah. We got CAC comments now. Some of these I think we've covered already, but let's just go
Yeah.
through them
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah, so we discussed up top, kind of the new office, land acquisitions, new projects, and how important grants and kind of identifying exactly what those costs will be, through the planning efforts ongoing. I think we talked about this in the question, and I think I was able to clarify the loan repayment scenario for this, and so I think we're good on comment C2. And that the commenter had the information that they needed to understand both loan breakout. It gets kind of complicated with the savings there and how that's tracked. And we talked about major projects, land acquisition, office space. There was a question about match. I think that's a good question is, yeah, sometimes as much as 25%, the Clean Water Fund and all those Bowser grants that we often go to is down to 10%, which is really nice. And so we do have some of our levy dollars, those local funds in the budget, and that can be used as match. Another great way to get the match that we've done in the past is with the staff time, that in-kind thing. And then having those overlapping grants of you can get a state grant and then a local grant and a federal grant. And as long as you can align, the eligibility requirements and the timelines, kind of a few things need to align there, but you can cover your match for your state grant with federal funds. And so we've got a few things in the works that we're trying to do with that. So any comments, questions about match?
No, it's just, again, when you talked about having personnel doing some of the work, and then that's a good offset for that 10% match requirement. That really hasn't worked out well for us, though. It seems that we don't have a lot of that time being allocated. Or not reimbursed maybe for it. these are reimbursement grants. Theoretically, we're supposed to spend the upfront monies and then get the grants to replace that. Right, we've played a timing game where we're paying wages, of course, all the time, but we're not getting into the bigger expenses on the projects until we actually have the grant in hand, and that was smart. But if you can look into that personnel side and just see if there is a way for us to capture more of that as the match and not having to tap into the levy funds, the general fund.
Sure, and I think you had kind of asked this question before, and we do factor in overhead, so our office space, the rent and administration and stuff goes into the Bowser billing rate calculator, and our time is billed out at this rate that includes your wages, benefits, and overhead. And
Which
then
includes board time, right? And administrator time.
it doesn't double count like a staff time, but it includes, they have a list of things that are allowed, and that's, your rent and office supplies and things like that. I'm not sure if board time is in there, but I can check.
I'm pretty sure it's there.
And then the key is that those grant programs, they require, and sometimes they'll audit you and ask for the timesheets. And so we just need to make sure that we've got all of that, which for the most part, we're really good about. So,
Right.
but I will look into that.
Okay.
All right. One CAC member commented that he would like to send out the budget to Lake Association boards within the district. Thought I'd just, since many of our board members here are also on the boards of lake associations, how you would take that comment and at what stage in the budgeting process you'd like to do that, if so.
I'll comment on that. I don't see that as being a productive conversation for a lake association. Our budget is so detailed, they're more focused on their own specific lake and what their needs are. I think it might be better if we surveyed them with specific questions regarding the budget rather than sharing the entire budget with them and asking them for feedback. I think we'd get a better response if we provided them with specific questions, like, for example, what are your immediate needs for your lake? Something like that, something general. Otherwise, they're just going to be overwhelmed with this budget. I don't know if that's a good way to proceed. I'll be interested to hear what others think.
I agree.
I think this was an accountant that asked this question, so.
I think
Isn't
that,
there one on the board, CAC? One of the guys with financial background, right? On the CAC, I think so.
Fury,
Yeah.
Tom Fury?
Maybe, I don't.
No, it's Ted Hansen.
Yeah, Ted
Yeah.
Hansen, right.
He's on the lake.
This sounds
This has
like.
got like an audit tone to it.
Well, he was in nonprofit accounting for years and years. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Dave said it pretty well, unless somebody has strong feelings. I just know for the Lake Association, Forest Lake Association board. You
No,
get a bunch of yawns, so it's just like too much, Dave, like you said, it's,
Well, it invites people to nitpick.
yeah,
President Schwab,
yeah, Chris?
is it possible to send each lake association just a part of the budget that pertains to that week? Just so they stay within the things that are relevant to that versus nothing at all?
I guess we could do that, but I don't know, I just, the terms and that, understanding what it's even all about, I think Dave is right, it's gonna be pretty tough. But.
yeah,
Or
if we
better
have
yet, we could
particular
just
issues-
invite. I was gonna say, better yet, if they have specific questions, why don't we just have, these meetings are open to anyone, so. It'd be a reason for some of them to attend if they had specific questions.
Right.
mhm. I think rather than doing a budget for all the reasons that have been stated, what I think people would really like to have is just, what are you gonna do in my area? You know, what kinds of things are you gonna do? And that's what worries me. I've said this in the past, is we've got this $7 million list of projects pending, but none of them are reflected in our budget. So which of these are we working on? Staff time counts, you know, that's part of the process of proceeding with that project. So if you phase this out so that you're not including the entire cost of the project in this year's budget, if you're doing preliminary work on it, then include that. Because then you have a nice, clear picture of what exactly is going to be taking place and at what stage it's at.
Yeah, I have a similar feeling. I'm
Yeah.
gonna try to follow up on that, but I think, what we could do, Chris, on your idea here is that after we know what projects we're gonna do on Forest Lake or Bone Lake, we could write a letter for the Lake Association, saying, here's what the plans are for next year on your lake, in simple general terms.
Absolutely.
And then send it not only to our board, but maybe ask the board, for example, it's all you have to do is then forward it to our members, so they kind of know what's coming up, and you'd have it in more lay terms of what the purpose of it is and what we hope to accomplish, et cetera. And then we might get some feedback from that. Like saying, where's the Weir project? We're gonna get that one back. That's kind of a Forest Lake situation right now.
Yeah,
We won't get
Sometimes
that
it's
until
from-
the rain stops.
Excuse me?
I said, we won't get that one until the rain slows down. You notice no one's gonna be concerned about it right now.
Right, well, we had a meeting with the guy today, the Weir, DNR Weir guy, and we said, we've already changed. Now the people wanna reduce the size of the Weir so we get more water out of the lake. So
But
anyway,
yeah, I
that's,
agree. I was thinking along the lines with how Manager Anderson spelled it out as far as a high level summary. I agree with Dave in that, getting into the actual budget, unless someone wants to, I don't think that's gonna add any value to anything.
I think we all agree on that one.
so why don't we, if we got representatives from all the Lake Association, if you feel like that's important, you can maybe put something together yourself and then just run it by Mike and that, and then we could, share it with your board or members as you want.
Mhm.
But we're trying to get more communication going with our members now too, including the board, so that would fit in well with our communication strategy, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so, Emily, want to pick up C6 then?
Sure, and before we move on, could I just clarify the follow-up actions for C5? Steve, did you say managers were going to be drafting a letter as they see it, or was there a directive for staff in there?
Mike, are you still on? That he may not be, okay, he was driving back, so,
Mhm.
No, I'm here. I'm
well,
just
how do
trying
the
to
managers, how does the managers
He's here,
feel about
he's
it?
there, he's here.
Oh, you still there? Okay, Mike, you have any thought about the managers doing this versus staff?
Well, just that, I think as Manager Loth noted, all the meetings are public meetings, to begin with, so, I mean, if anything, we can, send a link, or just make sure people are aware that we've had these meetings and here's the current budget. And they can look, because when you're trying to take things that are district wide and say, well, this one applies to you and this one doesn't or does, or some portion of it, it gets very complicated very quickly. But if the managers wanted to highlight something to the memberships, I think that would be fine. I would be just concerned about it, having staff try to parcel out so many details for communication for each particular lake association.
Yeah, I think it would be better if if the Lake Association manager, they understand their audience better than our staff does. And the kind of language they understand to fabricate it such that, it fits better into the audience you're trying to deal with. So if you want to do it, fine. If you don't want to do it, that's up to you. I know Chris has been working to try to get more communications going, but we also need to standardize the format. So these people in the Lake Association, including maybe putting it on a stationary, their lake association, so they can just send it out unless they wanna make some changes to it. So that's kind of what we've been trying to work towards, so,
I would
President
say-
Schmaltz,
yes.
Garrett Miller does a great job meeting with our association, sharing budget information regarding boat inspections and AIS treatments and communications regarding blue water science, doing lake water delineations. So, I think we do cover the budget and what expenditures are going for those issues that people are concerned about.
Right,
Okay,
President
thank you,
Schmaltz,
Dave.
Is he the shoreline?
Chris, go ahead.
now that I'm thinking about this, I think we're all talking about the same thing and it's outreach and it doesn't necessarily have to be about the budget. So I think we're kind of talking in circles, to be honest with you. If education and outreach includes everything that Manager Baki just talked about,
mhm,
and that level of communication is, I think, more appropriate for lake association boards and for the lake association boards to push out to their members if they want. And if we want to either dedicate time for lake association board members to join one of the budget meetings, I think that's what should happen if they want to ask specific questions about the budget.
Yeah, I had actually moved from talking about budget information to taking like the key projects or programs that could impact, say, Forest Lake, and sharing that with a lake association board, and hopefully then also sending it on to the membership, so they can see what's coming next year in terms of money allocated and
mhm.
what the goals and purposes were, not so much getting them involved in the budgeting process itself, just sharing the output with them, as you said before, as an outreach program.
Well, I think that's what I said, that's what Dave Bucky said,
Right.
Doug agreed to, so I agree with him, we are all talking about the same thing.
Okay,
It's worked for us up to this point, there's no reason it can't work for us going forward. But this pending project list to me is the big deal, I've already talked about it, but we need to show in the budget which things we are working on. And what our focus is going to be, and it better start being Comfort Lake and Little Comfort Lake, because those are the two sub-watersheds that haven't had that focus. We're working our way down the last 20 years or so. And so now it's time to get those things wrapped up and then focus on this climate resiliency focus that we're gonna have for the next 20 years.
okay, thank you, Manager Anderson. Emily, want to move on?
I think we clarified on Tuesday the sort of question coming up with the levy. And we had said that, this budget, kind of what Steve, you had said earlier, this budget doesn't have a levy increase, but yeah, let's work through what are the expenses that we want to see there, figure out what that deficit is, and then the board, will decide levy increases, and we'll also get that tax impact information in mid-August. I think we clarified this, showing where the 2023 audited year end was and the 2024 estimated year end. And then, clarifying the loan savings, that dedicated fund that we had talked about earlier, and how, depending how the board wants to set that levy, how much of the levy is dedicated to debt services, we can draw down on that savings or build up to it. And then they just asked for a historical context of full-time equivalents for the district over the years. So that was that final comment.
We move that 2024 estimate to 11.2 then,
What are you talking about? The,
FTEs. If we're gonna add a position in, might as well just stick it in there too.
well,
This is just reference information.
Yeah.
If we're gonna start thinking that way.
yeah. Well, I think we're only talking about that one position.
Right.
And,
Okay,
maybe the half stuff, but later in the year, couple months, we could probably swing that.
Dave, you had, or Doug, you had put some questions together. Did you get all your questions answered?
Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
All right, and then has anybody else got any questions that they want to ask at this point in time, or Emma, did you have anything else planned right now to discuss?
Just want to talk about next steps in the next board meeting discussion. But we
Okay,
can
why
get
don't
to
we
that
see if
when we're
there's
ready.
any other questions from the board members here before we jump into that kind of closing art discussion? Manager Anderson, anything on your part?
Yeah, I do, I have some things. Having this, estimated overhead and operating expenditure list was very helpful for me and, what I'm used to seeing. This is really the area here that makes up the levy. And this is our critical operations, overhead, staff, and that kind of thing. It includes the professional services, the lawyer, the engineers, and that kind of thing, not the project portions, but the general engineering that they do. And we already talked about moving the staff, area up to that 1.226 million. I'm concerned about these dips that we're having in administration areas. We had $40,000 budgeted for 2024. The estimate is 31,000. Were we that far off, honestly? And I don't think that we can continue to use that depressed number going forward, so I'm recommending that we, especially with a new person on board, there's gonna be some expenses with that. I'm moving that to total area to 450 from 324. And then under debt services fund, that should be 500,000 starting in 2025.
You know,
Because if you
I
look-
raised a lot of questions about the changes that you just saw, and Emily answered most of them, because most of the answers had to do by reallocating it into the project area or other areas. So I think we need to go with the work that the staff has done on this, rather than looking at asking the same questions again. So, I'd rather just increasing them. So that's why I asked all those questions, because they were either big drops or they were big increases.
Well, I don't see how there's anything allocated to projects from professional services. I mean, that's a big drop.
Well, if you read her comments, she
I
said,
did read her
yeah,
comment,
yeah. So that's all I'm saying.
but it doesn't show in the project and program area. We've got $7 million on potential projects, 7 million. So we've got to be working on some of these in 2025. And which ones are we going to be working
Well,
on?
I agree with that, but that needs to be better identified. It could be in there, we just haven't seen it, so I think, rather than just trying to up the budget, I think we should just,
I'm not trying to up the budget. This was a thoughtful process
okay,
that I used, so don't accuse me of
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
making darts on the wall. The debt services fund, we need to increase that to 500, in my opinion, because we are, if you look at that debt sheet, then we are moving into the area where we're going to have those pileups of the different grants that we've taken out, or different loans that we've taken out. So I think to provide that cushion, we were doing, I think, what was the amount, Emily, was it 150? I think per year?
Yeah.
So, yeah, now we're getting into the 300 and 400 area, so I think if we do 500, we're going to be certain that these funds, if you look over the debt service levy minus repayment, we're getting into negative numbers with our dedicated fund here in 2025, maybe even 2024. I don't have a ruler with me, but
And so that'll be if the services levy for
Yeah.
2025 goes from 400,000 up to 500,000. That would kind of make the scenario have some more leeway, but then that would be $100,000 less for other expenditures.
no. Yeah, and we don't want to do that. We want to keep the budget whole in those other areas, and So I firmly recommend that we increase that to 500 in 2025. And then I don't think there's gonna be any excess, there's gonna be some excess that year. And that goes into the dedicated fund and just keeps building that so that we can continue not having to transfer funds from another area.
So I guess I have a question. We're on the loan repayment projections, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah.
So if you look at
Page 5.
2025,
38.
I show right, for 225, we will be paying 325,000.
No, 438,607.
Okay, but that's not what it says on the worksheet.
That's what mine says.
You know what? I may have the older sheet, just a minute. Let me get that.
Page 9.
Yeah. I had notes on my old one, not much changed.
I can pull this up in the spreadsheet if
I
that's
got, never
helpful.
mind, I got it. Okay, I have an old copy. My apologies to everybody. I'll throw this one aside.
Apology accepted.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay. So my only question is, if it's gonna be 438,000, why do we want to raise it to 450?
We want to make it 500 each year. Set aside into our dedicated fund.
I could just show what that looks like here.
Oh, she's doing it on the screen.
Yeah, I don't know if it's helped. Sorry, it's kind of hard to show all of it. Then that would
So-
be 60, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You were gonna do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so if the board were to increase the service levy 400 to 500, it would mean it would be 61,000 more than what we're actually paying. And so that savings would continue to go up. And then it would be there, you know, for the future for us to draw down upon as we want. And I'll have to update that. But then if I understood Manager Anderson correctly, you were saying that increase that by 100,000, but keep everything else whole. So that means increasing the total levy by 100,000.
Okay, I guess my thought would be that we have a lot of numbers to deal with here, and so. If we start raising things up, other than what staff recommends. All we're creating is a big battle down the road here at the next couple meetings, because we're gonna have to cut things back or raise the levy. And then we're gonna lose track of what the staff really thinks we're gonna spend. And I guess I'm inclined to believe that we've had pretty good records in the past with our staff doing good budgets. And I think we should stick with what staff has, unless it's really a critical area that we want to get into and argue about. But I think, you know, you mentioned 2 or 3 areas, and I agree with it. If you can justify 500,000, fine. But
It's not, it's $500. We're talking about the payments. We're talking about the payment for our dedicated fund, right? And what's the total of our dedicated fund right now? The balance in that dedicated fund, do you know?
Yeah, 400,000 as of now.
That's it?
Yeah, as of 2023 year end. At the end of 2024, it'll be 455.
Okay, so when did we start this? It was more than just a year ago. It was 2 or 3 years ago, wasn't it?
2022.
Okay, and has that been used? Has that fund been used to pay the actual payment per year, or has it? No?
No,
Why is that so slow to grow? Oh, there it is, the dedicated fund balance, yeah. So why do we have just $55 added to that prior? See that 455, 696? Under debt service, under N, column N, yeah,
Yeah.
right there. Why didn't that grow by, why isn't that 800? That should have been
Yeah.
400 each year. So
Yeah,
we've been
it
using-
grows by. It grows by less because our payment is more. It'll bump up. We're instead of paying 150,000, now loan B repayments are hitting. And these 2 years, it was just 150,000. Now it's gonna be loan B, and then once we close out loan C, it'll be that half payment for loan C as well.
Yeah, well, I think maybe we messed up a little bit here because my understanding was that set aside was to start building that amount so that when we got into those middle years where we're paying more, we're paying on several different loans, that money would be available in the other fund and that we would continue to budget for the payment at that 350, whatever that standard rate was when we started. So maybe it was 350, that first loan. So we're working on two things. Keeping that levy amount at 350, but also setting aside money for those years coming up with the multiple loans. But we've been drawing from that earlier, so that's where we're getting our money for the payments every year. We have to do it. We're gonna be short. She's showing that on her report. The debt service levy minus repayment is negative for 6 years in a row. We can't have that.
Well, and showing the negative there means we're drawing on the savings.
Well, exactly, but we don't want to do that. We don't want to rely on the savings for that type of thing. The savings is to take us over that, I don't even call it savings, it's the carryover amount that we need for the 6 months of the next year.
Okay, this is something we need to look into, I think.
Do it. No question.
Because we just, well, what we did this year, we just upped it to 438. So next year would just be, it would be 514. We have 400 now for next year. And we would actually pay 514. Now, the question is, where did that money come from? So we have to take 114 out of the levy or out of somewhere else, right?
Well, the dedicated fund money comes out of the levy. That's part of the planning process, so.
Right.
But it means that what it shows is it shows a good thought pattern and it shows responsibility that we're setting aside the amount of money that we need to pay back that loan. And we're not gonna have to hope that we have enough in our general fund. We're gonna have it because it's gonna be in this fund.
Emily, if we, in 2025 or 2026, if we actually, instead of having 400,000 available, if we had 114,000, make that 514, where would that 114,000 come from?
Either increasing the total levy, or it would come from the implementation side of the levy, so the
Right.
readily available dollars.
Okay,
It's taking away from something else.
right,
So you
right.
don't wanna
So
do
that we have to make that decision then each year. But
Well-
yeah, I think we should look ahead like you're suggesting
Well,
and see where it's leading.
that's where we started it. We started this for that purpose.
But if you move it over now, you're gonna have to take it away anyway. So I mean,
Well, it's not a question of moving it over. I think we're using this fund, we started using this fund right away. And that's fine. We just have to make the adjustment in the amount that we
Accrual.
dedicate, yes, that we dedicate to it each year so that we have the proper amount for each year's payment.
okay, so if we do that, Emily, then you're gonna show a shortfall, right? Without changing the levy and everything else, right? So let's go ahead and do that, at least for the next 2 years. This year, it's only gonna be, next year, it's only gonna be 38,000, all right? Because that's all we're moving over.
No. That's gonna go until we're done with the 500.
Yeah,
Because what's gonna happen is every year you're
it's
taking
gonna have
out,
to happen, right,
you're,
right.
you're taking out more or that same amount. There's no buildup, in other words, so it's just a dedicated set aside.
Are you following what we're saying, Emily, about moving that? You moved the 38 over. The 438. Now, next year we'd move over the 114 and make that 514 in the estimated debt service levy. But if you do that, then we have to figure out where we're gonna find that money to replace the application of that dollars.
Yes, so if you wanted to set a service levy equal to the total repayment, then the savings, for lack of a better word, dedicated fund, would not change. But if the debt service levy exceeds the total repayment, that differential gets added to the dedicated fund. And conversely, if the service levy is lower than the total repayment, then we are pulling from that dedicated fund, and then that balance is getting lower.
Are you ready to talk about the levy? When I talk about these increases, remember, we talked about that at the beginning?
Yeah.
I have a higher levy.
I'm not sure we're ready to talk about that
All
tonight,
right,
because
all
we don't have the costs worked out. That's what I'm saying. So if we move all those, if we look to the future and we keep the estimated debt service levy actual black numbers, the same as the red numbers that's required. And you move those three numbers over, looking 3 years ahead, that's gonna change our 6 or 7 year forecast, right? So why don't you go ahead and do that, but mark it as an asterisk so we know we did it. And then we'll see what impact that has on the total 10-year forecast that you've done on the other sheet. That's gonna affect that sheet, right?
Yeah,
So why don't we just go ahead and do that, and maybe you can send that sheet out to us ahead of time, we can look at it before the next meeting.
okay. So I
And
will, I'll revise these three highlighted numbers for 2025, 26, 27. Make the debt service levy equal to the total repayment. And then I'll provide that, and then also the 10-year projection.
Right.
Well, I'd like her to do other version, as long as she's going back to this. I'd like her to do that 500 all the way down to the 457. Because the others can be budgeted. And we're paying off, yeah, there we go.
Well, we actually need 514, not 500. So she's gonna have to move 114.
Well, no, because there's remainders that should happen still from where we are in 2024 and 2025. There's already a remainder in the fund of 55,695. So the next 500 that comes is gonna make it 555,696. That'll cover some of that stuff, so I think we're gonna be okay.
Does this scenario show, and so then we keep the total levy flat, that means it's that much less dollars available for implementation, and I can show how that works on the 10-year budget projection.
Implementation of what?
I don't wanna take anything off the budget, though, I just wanna show a bigger shortage.
Yeah,
We're not gonna be looking at, we're gonna only look at it in the 10-year chart, because that's the only thing it affects. We only got 38,000 to deal with this coming next year.
Don't
What?
try to balance the budget.
Yeah, don't
that
try
you
to
have.
balance the budget, that's our job.
Yeah,
But I think we should show that deficit, we should, on the 10-year plan, we need to see what impact it's gonna, I have to take a look at it after you get it done and do some thinking about it. So,
$500 should allow us to pay off some loans earlier. And then we're going to have this great record with MPCA to do more.
I just
A
make sure I
little bit.
understand, you said the estimated debt service levy should be 500,
Yeah,
but we're short 114,000, so it's gotta be higher than that if you're gonna pay off, so.
well, only based on what she had before. She already put 500 in there and it increased it right on the screen there. So it balances out.
Do you
What's the
want all
500?
of these highlighted cells to equal 500,000 or to equal the total repayment?
Do it with just the 500 estimated debt service levy. 500 all the way down to, well, 457. One more. Yeah. Okay. Now punch that in and let's see where we are.
Yeah, so that would leave, so then we could basically not even. We'd have to do 25,416 at one point, but yeah, we would have so much left in that dedicated fund by 2031 that we had hung on to that we essentially wouldn't even need to make payments from 2032 to 2034.
Mhm. Right,
But then I'll show on that 10-year budget, that means budget deficits of 100,000 or
On your
50,000 or so.
on your current levy amount. So again, you're not trying to balance this budget. We're just adding in the things that we want to see, the impact it would have for that specific thing, right? So there's gonna have to be a levy increase, which is what I started out saying. You know, when we started at 5 o'clock, so.
Okay, I let this thing get out of control, my apologies on this, why don't we do both 500 and 514, Emily, do two versions? And then I'm not sure we're gonna have any time to talk about next steps, so. Did you wanna make a comment on quickly about what we wanna do next?
I can run these scenarios. I can show a version that shows if we kept the total levy the same. I can show another version that shows if we increase the total levy by that differential. And so that means we're increasing the levy even more. So I feel good that I can do that. We don't have a special meeting currently scheduled for the next budget workshop. However, the June 27th regular board meeting is next week. I think we might have kind of a light agenda. And so I might recommend that we pick back up discussion next Thursday, since if that time works for everyone. We've just got maybe a couple other agenda items. It won't be this full 2-hour block, but.
Emily, but one thing what I would like you to do is that, make sure the total repayment lot is covered by the estimated debt service levy. That's what by moving that over, and then do the version that, that Manager Anderson will look at by just making it 500 all the way down to wherever she wanted, 457.
She just did that.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
but I don't want you to change the levy dollars at all, just leave the levy dollars where they were 3%, 3%, 3%. We'll have to deal with this, we're gonna have other changes that we're gonna have to deal with, I don't wanna start screwing around with the levy until we know what we have to cut out,
Yeah.
or what we have to add.
It's the only way to do it.
Right. We can't do it as we go along here.
Yeah.
We have to wait till everything's done. And we have to look for 200,000 or 500,000 or whatever it might be, or only 50,000, then we'll deal with it. Okay with everybody, okay with that? Okay. All right, good job, Emily, thanks. We made good progress. Any other comments or questions? This gets kind of tedious, I know, guys, but.
President Schmaltz?
Yes.
I looked up my notes. The next quarterly review meeting is July 1st. Mr. Kinney had suggested Mondays, and that is with you and Mr. Kinney, and I can send you an email regarding that. And you
That
can
would be
set up a
great.
time with them.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, any other comments? If not, then I'll entertain a motion for adjournment. Thanks, everybody, for the effort tonight. I know it's hard to go through this stuff and,
So moved.
second.
Second.
Okay, Tori, you do a roll call vote,
Nobody
please?
else jumped in.
Aye.
Yeah, so,
He may have left already.
Manager Lowe,
yeah, it's done.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Baki,
Hi.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
President Schmaltz.
Aye, okay. Motion carries, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody. See you
Good night.
next week.
Okay,
Good night.
everyone have a good night.
Good night.